Picture a place that processes 40,000 animals a day. Now make it July. Add a heat wave that's been sitting on the city for 11 days straight, with no sign of moving. Add the rendering plants running at full capacity 2 blocks south, boiling down fat and bone into lard and glue and fertilizer around the clock. Add the blood drains that run beneath the streets like a second river system, a slow, dark river that never quite stops moving. Add the smell. I need to pause here because the smell needs its own paragraph. The smell of the Chicago Union's stockyards in July 1924 was not just one smell. It was a geological event. It was a presence with physical weight. It lived in your clothes, your hair, the skin behind your ears, the inside of your nose. People who really lived in this neighborhood, who slept there, ate there, loved there, had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing your own heartbeat. But visitors from downtown, journalists, officials, politicians who came to inspect the yards and then went back to their lakefront apartments, they threw up, not metaphorically, they actually vomited. That's where you live. 3 floors above a neighborhood that exists because the slaughterhouse exists. A neighborhood built by and for and around the daily industrial efficient killing of 4-legged animals on a scale the world had never seen anywhere else. Until Henry Ford got his ideas, and even Ford admitted he got some of those ideas from Chicago. You're not a tourist here. You're not an inspector. You are the person tourists came to inspect. So, I make these history stories and I genuinely have no idea if you're fallen asleep to them or if you're just someone who lies in bed at 2 in the morning wanting to feel the particular exhaustion of a 10-hour manual labour shift through your phone speaker. Either way, get comfortable. The mattress is straw tick. The July air is not cooperating. And somewhere 3 floors below you, nothing has fully stopped moving. Here we go. Your eyes open. For a half second, just a half second, you don't know where you are. Then the smell tells you. The smell always tells you before anything else does. It's not one smell. You've understood that much in the 8 months since you stepped off the boat at Ellis Island with your cousin Joseph's address written on a scrap of paper and a single word of English. Please, and absolutely nothing else. The smell is layered, like the city itself, like the geology of a place. The top layer is iron, blood iron, the way copper tastes when you bite your lip too hard. It's in the air here at all times. You breathe it. Your lungs have made some permanent accommodation for it. Beneath that, fat. Rendered fat from the plants 2 blocks south. The boiling down operations that run day and night and produce the lard that goes into American kitchens from New York to San Francisco. In July heat, this smell blooms. It goes from background note to something almost sweet, almost nauseating, almost, if you've been here long enough, almost like home. Beneath that, the pens, 400,000 animals in holding on any given day, their waste, their fierce sweat, their bodies pressed together in the summer heat. Hogs mostly, cattle, some sheep, the combined exhalation of creatures that don't know yet, that are still eating and drinking and moving, that have not yet been told what this place is. Beneath all of that, old wood, damp plaster, the particular smell of a building erected in 1899 to house as many people as could be packed into it, that has absorbed 25 years of immigrant bodies and immigrant cooking, cabbage and lard and black bread and the particular sweet sour smell of people who work too hard to bathe as often as they'd like, including you. Welcome to Back of the Yards, Chicago, July 1924. Your name is Thomas Kowalski. You're 21 years old. You came here from a village outside Krakow 8 months ago with a cousin's address, $17 in American money, which felt like a fortune on the boat and was gone in 4 days, and a constitution that your mother told you was built for hard work. She wasn't wrong. She also didn't know what hard work meant here. Back home, everyone said Chicago would make you. They said the stockyards paid real wages. They said a young man with strong hands could become something in America. They said it like it was simple, like the distance between young man with strong hands and something was a straight line you could just walk. Nobody mentioned the smell. The room is a rectangle approximately 9 feet wide by 14 feet long. You know those measurements because you paced them out your first week here, out of some need to understand the precise dimensions of the life you'd stepped into. There are 4 people in this room. You, your cousin Josef, who is 27 and has been here 6 years and knows everything, who sleeps on the good side of the mattress near the wall. Władysław, who everyone calls Władek, who arrived 3 months before you and is from somewhere in the mountains and barely speaks and has a cough that started in March and hasn't stopped. And Piotr, who is 17 and should probably be in school somewhere and is saving every cent for a reason he hasn't told anyone yet. The mattress is straw tick over wooden slats. You share it with Josef. Władek and Piotr share another one against the opposite wall. The window faces east. In July, it catches the full force of morning sun by 6 a.m. The glass is single pane and has a crack in the upper left corner, repaired with a strip of paper paste that does nothing for the heat and also nothing for the flies. The flies are another thing nobody mentions. In July, in back of the yards, the flies are a kind of weather system. They come from the yards, from the pens, from the blood channels and the offal pits. And they understand that windows and walls are not serious obstacles. You sleep with the window open because the alternative is suffocating, and sleeping with the window open means sleeping with the flies, and you have made your peace with this. You've made your peace with a lot of things in 8 months. The water basin is on a small table in the corner. You fill it from the tap in the hallway. 1 tap for the whole floor, which means 1 tap for 8 people. The water comes out brown in the mornings and slightly less brown by evening. Mrs. Wierzbicka on the 2nd floor says the city is working on the pipes. She's been saying this since she arrived in 1917. The floor is bare wood, cold in December, warm in July, and sticky. Always slightly sticky, no matter how much you scrub it, because the fat from the yard settles on every surface in this neighbourhood like a second skin. It's 5:15 in the morning. You know without looking at a clock because Josef is already moving. Josef is always moving at 5:15. In 6 years here, Josef has never been late. He talks about this with the pride of a man who has elevated punctuality into a personal philosophy. The line starts at 6, he says, meaning the time card line at the Swift and Company gate. Gate 3 on Exchange Avenue. Miss the first count, you lose an hour's pay. Lose an hour's pay twice in a week, Wachowski notices. Wachowski notices you're on the outside list. Outside list means no work Tuesday, maybe no work Wednesday. You want to explain to Pani Brodka why the rent is 2 days late. Pani Brodka is the landlady. She lives on the 1st floor. She has the specific energy of a woman who has heard every possible excuse for late rent and found each one personally offensive. You do not want to explain anything to Pani Brodka. So you're up at 5:15. The heat is already there. July in Chicago doesn't cool down at night. It gets less hot. The air stops actively baking you and moves into something more like a sustained humid pressing, like something is leaning on your chest. You move carefully in the dark because Wadek's cough was bad this week, and he finally fell asleep around 2 in the morning and you don't want to wake him. You find your work clothes where you left them, draped over the end of the bed frame, because the alternative is putting them on the floor, and the floor is the floor. A rough cotton shirt, once white, now the yellowish grey of something washed too many times in water that wasn't quite clean. Wool trousers that are wrong for July but are what the work requires. They're thicker, they protect your legs better from splashes. You don't think too hard about what you're protecting your legs from. Your boots are the most important thing you own. They cost 2 weeks' wages 3 months in, when the pair you'd brought from Poland finally surrendered. These are proper work boots, thick-soled, leather-treated until it's almost waterproof, laces going halfway up your shin. They are, objectively, the best thing you've ever owned. They're also impossible after months on the kill floor to fully clean. You pull them on in the hall to avoid waking Wadek, lacing them by feel in the dim light from the single gas jet Mrs. Wierzbicker refuses to turn off overnight because, as she explains it, she lived through a time when there was no light at all, and she intends to die in a building with at least one light burning. You stop at the hallway basin, splash cold water on your face and the back of your neck. The water is bracingly cold at this hour. The pipes cool overnight, and for about 40 minutes after 5 in the morning, the water comes out almost cold. By 7 it'll be lukewarm. By noon, on a day like this, it'll be body temperature. You catch your face in the fragment of mirror nailed above the basin. You look older than 21. Not dramatically. You haven't earned those dramatic lines yet. But there's something around the eyes, some specific quality of tiredness that sets in when you've done physically hard work for long enough. That makes a face look worked in, like a leather glove that's been used. Your mother would say you look healthy, strong. You suspect she would say this while privately thinking you look tired. You go downstairs. Josef is in the shared kitchen on the second floor, 4 burners for 12 people, with a slab of bread and a cup of tea that is mostly hot water, with a tea bag that has been used 4 times already, and has the colour and approximately the flavour of very pale memory. He tears the bread in half without asking, and puts the other half in front of you. This is the whole extent of the morning's hospitality, but it's genuine. Hot today, he says. It's been hot every day. Hotter today? He says this with the authority of a man who's done 11 summers in this neighbourhood and can rid the heat the way farmers red weather. The stockers are saying the drainage backed up again on the south side of the hog house. That means the floor crew spends the first 2 hours clearing it before the kill starts, which means Wachowski is in a bad mood from 6:30, which means don't give him a reason. Don't give him a reason, Josef confirms. He looks at you. You're on shackling today? 3rd position, hog line, he nods. 3rd position on the hog line means you get to the shackle station after the knocker and before the sticker. Your job is to take the hog after it's been stunned, after the knocker has done his work with a captive bolt, after the animal has gone down, and loop the chain around its rear leg so it can be hoisted onto the overhead rail and begin its journey through the disassembly process. The job pays 42 cents an hour, which is $3.36 for an 8-hour day. If you get a full 8 hours, which you usually don't in summer because the foremen push the line faster in summer to process through the heat, which means you finish your quota in 7.5 hours and then wait without pay for the rest of your shift to end officially so you can use the time card machine. There are things about the American labour system you're still in the process of fully understanding. Eat, Joseph says. You eat. The bread is yesterday's. Dense, grey. The kind your mother used to make with rye flour back home that has become your primary comfort food in America. Not because it's particularly good here, but because it's the shape of something familiar in a world made mostly of unfamiliar shapes. Outside, the sun is coming up over the street. The light through the kitchen window catches the steam rising from Josef's tea and turns it briefly golden, which is the one beautiful thing that happens before 6 a.m. in back of the yards in July. Outside, the air hits you like a wall. Not a cold wall, the opposite of a cold wall, a wall of accumulated July. Heat that the brick and cobblestone have been absorbing since May and are now slowly releasing. An ambient temperature that has stopped being weather and started being simply the way air is. It is not yet 6 in the morning. The street is already alive. This is the thing you didn't expect before you came here. You thought of America as large and spaced out. You had seen pictures of wheat fields, prairies, plains stretching on forever. You did not expect cities where people lived as closely packed as any European slum, where the street at 5:50 in the morning was already full of men walking in the same direction, moving in the grey pre-dawn light with the specific purposeful shuffle of people who have to be somewhere. Exchange Avenue, South Halstead, the streets around the yards, everyone walking toward the same gates. Some of them you know by name, most by face. The Lithuanian men from the building on Gross Avenue, 5 or 6 of them, loose group, talking in a language that should sound similar to Polish and isn't. The Slovak workers from the rendering plants, who have the particular look of men who do smell work, a kind of defensive blankness, as if they've decided that whatever their faces show has nothing to do with what they're smelling. The Mexican workers, who started coming in numbers after the 1919 strike, who keep mostly to themselves and are paid slightly less than everyone else, for reasons everyone understands and nobody says out loud. And the black workers, the great migration men who came up from Georgia, from Mississippi, from Alabama, looking for what everyone was looking for, who found the stockyards and found the yards would hire them, at least hire them for the worst jobs at the worst pay, who live in their own boarding houses further east, who walk these same streets in the morning but keep a specific distance from the Polish and Lithuanian and Slovak workers, because the 1919 riot is not ancient history. The 1919 riot is 5 years ago. Some of the men on this street were in it. Some of them are walking next to each other right now, morning shift, same direction, not looking at each other. History doesn't end when the fighting stops. It just learns to walk quietly. You fall in beside a man named Andrei Chepwowski, not your building, the next one over, and he nods and hands you a cigarette without asking, because that's the morning ritual, and you take it because you smoke in the mornings now, which you didn't 8 months ago. America has given you this. Drainage backed up, Andrei says. I heard. Floor's going to be shit. Floor's always shit, he laughs. It's an honest laugh. The laugh of a man who says a true thing and appreciates having it confirmed. You walk, and then the yards come into view, and it doesn't matter how many times you've seen them, they still do something to your sense of scale. The Union stockyards cover 1 square mile. 1 square mile of pens and runways and buildings and chutes and rail lines and drainage ditches, all dedicated to the processing of animal life at an efficiency that has no parallel anywhere on Earth. It is, if you step back far enough to see it whole, a kind of marvel. A monument to what human industrial ingenuity can accomplish when pointed at the problem of meat. From the street, you see first the gate, The grand limestone arch on Exchange Avenue, built in 1875 with a carved bull's head above the arch that looks down at everyone entering. You've decided that Bull's expression is either majestic or ironic. You're not yet sure which. Behind the gate, the pens, hundreds of them stretching in every direction, wooden structures, low-roofed, dark inside, full of movement. The noise from the pens is a background constant, a blended sound that is not quite mooing and not quite squealing, and not quite anything you'd have heard in a village in Poland, but something you've learned to pass. The cattle sound, the hog sound, the occasional bleat of sheep. In the pens, the animals don't know. That's the thing you've noticed. They don't know. They're in there eating the hay thrown down for them, drinking the water, some sleeping, standing up, and they don't know. How could they? How do you explain to a hog, in any language it understands, what the next 24 hours hold? You show your gate card to the man at gate 3. He barely glances at it. He knows your face. You go in. Swift and Company's hog house sits on the south side of the main processing complex, a long brick building with ventilation slats cut near the roofline that don't do nearly enough work in July to justify their existence. The smell inside is not worse than outside. You've been expecting this for 8 months, expecting some threshold you'd cross entering the building where the smell would become something truly different, truly unbearable. It doesn't. It's the same smell, just more concentrated, more honest. The floor is concrete, sloped toward the central drainage channels, glistening. You learn on your first day what the floor means. The floor's always wet, always dark. In July, the floor steams slightly in the morning when the doors are opened and cooler outside air meets the warmer air inside that's been sitting there overnight with yesterday's residue. You've seen men slip on this floor. You've slipped yourself. There are handholds bolted to the walls at intervals, just horizontal bars of iron pipe, and you use them more than you'd ever admit to your foreman. Walkowski is already there. He's standing at the far end of the line with his clipboard, talking to one of the floor supervisors, a wiry man named Dankowski, who's worked here for 15 years and moves through the space with the specific confidence of someone who has processed every possible type of bad news and filed it away. Walkowski is big, not tall, maybe 5'9", but wide, built in the specific way of men who did physical work in their youth and have since moved into supervisory roles and retained the body without the work. His face is permanently red, whether from heat, general irritation or blood pressure, you've never determined. He has a moustache he tends to with a care that seems inconsistent with everything else about him. He doesn't look at you when you take your position. He doesn't need to. Walkowski tracks everyone in the room through some peripheral awareness you've come to think of as evolutionary adaptation. Line starts in 4 minutes, he says to the air. You tie your apron, rubber-backed cotton, thick enough to matter, not thick enough to keep everything out, and take your chain from the hook where you left it yesterday. The chain. About 18 inches long, with a heavy iron hook at one end and a connecting link at the other that clips to the overhead rail trolley. Its job is simple. Loop it around the rear leg of a stunned hog, connect it to the trolley, let the overhead system carry the animal forward. You've done this approximately 11,000 times since you started in October. 11,000 is not a number you calculated. It's a number that exists somewhere in your hands. Your hands know this motion the way they'd know a handshake, the way they'd know how to cut bread or tie a boot. The knocking box is 15 feet to your left, a low wooden enclosure where the animals come in one at a time on a ramp from the pens, where the knocker, a man named Bigansky, who has the arms of a man who swings heavy things for a living, is doing the work that begins the process. You don't watch Bigansky work. Not anymore. You did at first. You watched everything at first, with the wide-eyed attention of someone trying to understand every piece of a machine they've suddenly become part of. You've stopped watching. Not because it's unbearable, as it's not unbearable, or you've recalibrated what unbearable means, but because it's not your part. Your part is what comes after. The chain, the hook, the clip to the rail. The line starts. The disassembly line at Swift & Company's hog processing house moves at a pace of one animal every 30 seconds at full production. One animal every 30 seconds. You don't process that as a number. You process it as a rhythm. As the interval between the thud from the knocking box and the moment the animal comes sliding through the opening in the low wall, limp now, legs loose, and the moment your hands reach for the rear left leg and loop the chain and click it home and step back as the trolley takes the weight and carries it forward. Thud, slide, loop, click, step, thud, slide, loop, click, step. In the first month your hands were slow. Warkowski would stand behind you with his clipboard and not say anything. Just stand there, which was its own communication. Your hands learned to be fast. They learned the specific angle of approach that wastes no motion. They learned the exact tension of the chain that means it's seated correctly on the hock before you connect it. The feel of it right versus almost right, which is different, which matters. By month 3, Walkowski stopped standing behind you. That was a kind of promotion that involved no change in pay. The heat starts building inside the building around 7:30. By July, the outside temperature is in the high 80s before 8 in the morning. The building traps it. The animals' bodies radiate it. The overhead steam pipes that run along the ceiling for the scalding and singeing further along the line contribute to it. By 10 a.m., the temperature inside the hog house on a hot July day is between 95 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You sweat. Everyone sweats. Sweat is part of the floor. Sweat is part of the air. You drink water when you can, from the single spigot in the brake alcove, a concrete space with a wooden bench and a shelf with a few tin cups everyone uses and nobody's sure anyone cleans. The water comes from the city supply. It tastes like pipe metal and summer and something you've decided not to analyse further. You drink it anyway. In summer, you drink enough water to float a small boat and sweat it out before you've walked back to your station. To your left, Bigansky, who never talks while he works and communicates exclusively through grunts and occasional sharp hisses you've learned to pass as a personal language. A rising grunt means the line's moving too fast. A falling grunt means equipment problem. The hiss means get out of the way. To your right, the sticker. A man named Cheswow, who is 44 years old and has been at this station for 12 years, who has the physical steadiness of someone doing extremely skilled work in a very calm state. Cheswow never rushes. Even in this heat, even when the line is running fast, Cheswow moves at exactly one speed, and the speed is correct. You asked Cheswow once, in your first month, how he does this every day. He looked at you for a long moment, a look that was not unkind, but very measuring. You think about something else, he said. Not nothing. Something specific. I think about my daughter's wedding. Every day. I've been thinking about it for 3 years. It's a very nice wedding. His daughter married in 1921. He's been running that wedding in his head every day since. Pick something, he told you, something you want to go back to. Go back to it. The hands know what they're doing. The hands don't need you. You've been trying to take this advice. It works, partially. You think about the river outside Krakow, where you used to fish with your father's cousin on summer evenings. The specific quality of that light, the coldness of the water when you waded in, the sound of it. Your hands loop the chain. Your mind is on a river bank 7,000 miles away. At approximately 10:20 in the morning, on a Thursday in the second week of July, a man named Henrik Rudzik, who works 3 stations down the line, on the splitting table, who is 38 years old and came from Gdansk and has 2 children in a building on South Hermitage Avenue, collapses, not dramatically. He doesn't fall backward, doesn't cry out. He simply stops being vertical. One moment he's doing his job, and the next moment he is on the floor. The line stops. When the line stops, the sound changes. The overhead chain system has a mechanical hum you've internalized so completely that you only notice it when it's gone. Its absence is loud. Wachowski is there in 30 seconds. He looks at Rudzik. He looks at the 2 men who've gone to their knees to check on him. His face does something. Not concern exactly, but the specific calculation of someone running math about time and quota and the cost of various options. Get him to the side, he says. They carry Rudzik to the break alcove. He's conscious. His eyes are open. He's trying to say something, but he can't stand. His face is the colour of cement, and he's stopped sweating, which is what you learn to watch for. When a man stops sweating in this heat, it's not because he's cooling down. It's because he has nothing left to sweat. Heat exhaustion, or worse. The company has a medical station, a room near the administrative building, about 200 yards from the hog house. A nurse named Miss Holmberg, Swedish-American, who's been here 3 years and has the contained efficiency of someone who's made peace with the gap between what she was trained to do and what she can actually do with the resources she has. Walkowski makes a decision. Kowalski. He says your name without looking at you. Take him. This means you're now responsible for getting Henrik Rudzik from the hog house to the medical station, which will cost you approximately 40 minutes of paid work time, and there will be no adjustment to your daily rate to reflect this, because you are technically not on the line while doing it, and the company only pays you when you're on the line. You don't argue. Nobody argues with Wachowski. Not because Wachowski is cruel, he's not cruel exactly, but because behind Wachowski is Dantkowski, and behind Dantkowski is the superintendent, and behind the superintendent is the knowledge that outside Gate 3 right now, there are men waiting who would take your job at 38 cents an hour and thank God for it. You get under Rudzik's left arm. Andrzej, who appeared from somewhere, takes the right. Outside the hog house, the air is different. It is technically the same air, the same July, the same smell. But after 2 hours inside, it hits you like a window opening, like the difference between suffocating and merely struggling. Rudzik is heavier than he looks. Dead weight is different from upright weight. The physics of a man who can't coordinate his own body are different from the physics of a man you're helping walk. You feel it in your lower back, in your shoulders. Can you hear me? You ask him in Polish, because in this neighbourhood Polish is a reasonable first guess. He moves his lips. Yes. We're taking you to the medical station. Not far. He doesn't respond to this, but something in the tension of his body shifts, slightly, like acknowledgement. You walk past the cattle pens. The cattle are moving in the pens on this side, the new arrivals from the overnight rail cars, and they are making noise. A low, constant sound that on some frequencies seems almost like complaint. They press against the wooden fencing and their eyes are wide, and their bodies are warm even from 5 feet away. You've been here long enough that you don't feel certain things about this that you felt when you first arrived. You've built the internal architecture you need to do this work without it dismantling you. You think about the river. Miss Holmberg opens the door before you knock. She's seen you coming through the window. Heat, you say. This is the full extent of the diagnosis required. Put him there. She gestures to the closest cot. There's already a man on the cot by the wall with a damp cloth over his face. The second heat case this morning. You lower Rudzik onto the cot. Miss Holmberg takes his pulse, checks his eyes, puts ice wrapped in cloth on the back of his neck, gives him water from a cup with a handle, because his hands aren't reliable right now. He'll be fine, she says, to you, not to him, as if he's not in the room. His type usually is. His type. You wonder what type that is. The type that collapses? The type that works until they collapse? The type that comes from Poland with strong hands and tries to build something and sometimes overestimates how much their body is willing to give? You look at Rudzik on the cot. He's going to be fine. Miss Homburg says so. But here's what you're calculating while you stand in this concrete room with antiseptic cutting through the other smell for the first time today. Rudzik is going to be fine. He's also going to lose today's wages. The medical station is off the clock. When he goes back tomorrow, he'll be watched, not with cruelty, but with the specific attention of someone deciding whether this is a reliable piece of the machine or an unreliable piece. Rudzik has 2 children on South Hermitage Avenue. That is the thing that sits in your chest as you walk back to the hog house. Wachowski doesn't acknowledge your return. The line is running again. They put someone else in your position for the 40 minutes you were gone. That someone steps out of your spot without a word. You step in. The chain is where you left it. Thud, slide, loop, click, step. The rhythm reclaims you like water closing over a stone. Your hands know what to do. Your hands don't need you. You go back to the river. The lunch break is 30 minutes, not 31, not 29, 30. You've watched men lose fractions of wages for arriving back at the line 35 seconds late from lunch, and you've learned to treat the 30 minutes as a military operation. 15 minutes to eat, 15 minutes for everything else. The workers' lunch area is not a cafeteria. The company provides no food, no seating, no amenity. There is a concrete yard behind the main building, about 40 yards by 30, with a row of wooden benches along one wall and a spigot at one end and shade only where the building itself casts it. At 12:30, when the lunch whistle blows, approximately 200 men pour into this yard, and the social geography that rules the hog house reorganizes itself with the same patterns. The Polish workers in one area, the Lithuanian workers slightly apart. The black workers at the far end near the spigot, not because they was told to go there, but because the accumulated weight of everyone else not moving toward them makes the far end the available space. This is something you've noticed and filed under things you haven't figured out what to do with. You sit with Josef and Andrei, and a man named Stanisław, who is quiet and methodical, and is saving to bring his wife over from Warsaw, and who shows you a photograph of her when he's had enough wine at the Sunday dinners at the community hall on 47th Street. She has a serious face in the photograph, but Stanisław says she has a laugh like a bell, and you believe him. Your lunch is what you packed this morning. Bread, a slice of cold pork fat, a hard-boiled egg if you happen to have an egg this week, and a cold potato that has been in your pocket since 5 in the morning and has the specific texture of a thing that started as food and is making its way toward being a different category of thing. It's enough. It fills you. You've stopped expecting food to be anything other than fuel. Rudzik, Josef says. He'll be fine, Miss Holmberg said. He lost the shift. I know. Josef chooses bread. Tomorrow they'll move him to a lighter position. Casing room, maybe. Lower pay. He has 2 children. Everyone has something. This sounds harder than Josef means it. You know him well enough to hear the thing underneath it. The practical acceptance of a man who has been here 6 years, who has watched the accommodation process happen to every new arrival, who knows there is a cost to everything, and the cost must eventually be paid. The lunchyard in the heat is a specific social organism. Men eating in the relative quiet of exhaustion, the conversation happening not because anyone needs to talk, but because silence in a group is its own pressure. Arguments over cards in one corner. 2 men near the wall sleeping, sitting up. A kid, maybe 16, working the rendering plant, eating something out of a tin that smells of nothing good. There is no shade on the south end of the yard. The men on the south end are sitting in full July sun. They don't move. There are no available spots in the shade. They sit in the sun and eat their lunches and don't complain about the sun because the sun is not a thing you complain about. The sun is a fact. At 12:55, everyone starts moving back. You finish your potato and follow. On the walk home at 4 o'clock, the city opens around you in a way it doesn't in the morning when you're moving with purpose. In the afternoons, sometimes you walk slowly. This is a thing Josef doesn't understand. Josef goes home the direct route always, but you've developed this habit since your 3rd month of taking the long way at least twice a week. Back of the yards is not just the slaughterhouse. The slaughterhouse is the reason it exists, but what grew up around it is a neighbourhood, complete, dense, full of the pieces of ordinary human life arranged in the specific grammar of people who did not choose to be here exactly, but who are here, and who have decided that being here means building something. On 45th Street, the butcher, a Polish butcher named Mazurkiewicz, who sells cuts of pork trimmed from the yard's processing, the cuts too small or irregular for the commercial buyers, the pieces Swift doesn't bother with, at prices a stockyard worker can actually afford, which is important. Next to him, a woman selling pierogi from a window, actual pierogi, potato and cheese, 40 cents a dozen, and on Friday evenings there's a line down the street. Her name is Pani Grzelak, and she's been doing this out of her apartment since 1919. If you ask, she'll tell you she's been meaning to open a real shop, but the rent on the ground floor is always higher than she expects, and besides, the apartment window has worked fine so far. Across the street, St. Joseph's Catholic Church, taller than anything else on the block. The Polish community built it in 1914, raised the money in 5 years of Sunday collections from stockyard workers, which means they were tithing on wages that left nothing to spare. They built it anyway, with the specific stubbornness of people who understood that what they were building was more than a church. In the evening, the bells from St. Joseph's travel through the whole neighbourhood. You hear them 3 floors up through the window crack, and they catch something in your chest that you haven't fully named. There's a tavern on the corner of 46th and Marsh Field that you've been to twice. Dark inside, beer is watered. The company is men from the yards, which means it smells faintly of work even inside the tavern, either a comfort or an irony, depending on your mood. The tavern's owner, a man named Kopaki, keeps a photograph on the wall behind the bar, a wide panoramic photograph, the kind taken with a special camera that can capture a whole scene in one frame. It shows the stockyards from above, from the observation platform of the Exchange building, the grandest building in the Yards complex, where buyers and sellers and company men work in offices with electricity and fans. From that height the scale is visible, the perfect geometric layout of the pens, roads running through on a grid, the long low processing buildings, rail lines coming in from every direction, 40-some rail lines, enough to bring in the animals and take out the product and run the whole enterprise with the efficiency of a city dedicated to a single purpose. You've looked at that photograph a dozen times. You've stood in it, in the tiny figure of it, somewhere in those buildings, every working day for 8 months. It looks different from above. It looks almost beautiful from above. On a Wednesday evening you find Czesław in the community hall on 47th Street, sitting at a corner table with a glass of beer and the specific expression of a man who came somewhere to be left alone. You sit across from him anyway, because Czesław has information you need. He looks at you, drinks, doesn't say go away. You know what they said about this neighbourhood when Sinclair wrote his book? He says it to the glass, not to you. You know about the jungle. Józef has a copy in Polish, battered, the cover separated from the spine, published in 1906. A book about the stockyards and the men who work them. That was supposed to be about the men, but became famous for the passages about what goes into the meat. He came here, Czesław says, spent weeks, walked these streets, talked to men like us, wrote the book, caused a national scandal about adulterated sausage. He says the last 2 words with a very specific tone. The government passed a law about what you can put in food, the Meat Inspection Act. Big news, very important, he looks at you. The workers, the men he actually came to write about, the wages, the conditions, the heat, the accidents, the way they fire your cousin if you cause trouble. He goes back to his beer. Nothing. The American people were very concerned about the sausage. He drinks. That's not bitterness, he says, though it might be. That's the information. Know what you're dealing with. You sit with this. Is it worth staying, you ask, which is the question underneath every other question. He thinks about it genuinely. You can see the thinking, the real weighing of it. I've been here 12 years, he says finally. I've got a house, renting, but a house. My daughter is married. My son is in school. A pause. My lungs are probably not great. He taps his chest. Something in there sounds slightly wrong when he coughs. But my son speaks English without an accent. He doesn't know what it means to be hungry. He argues with his teachers. Another pause. Yes, it's worth staying. He stands, drains his glass, puts on his coat. Don't let the yards be the whole thing, he says. Go somewhere else sometimes. See the rest of the city. You think this is Chicago. This is not Chicago. Chicago is something else entirely. He walks out. On a Saturday in the 3rd week of July, Saturday being a half day at the yards ending at noon, you take Czesław's advice. You take the L. The elevated railway stop is on Halsted Street, about 6 blocks from your building. You've seen it every day. The iron structure running above the street. The trains rattling along it with the sound of something fast on metal rails. Something both industrial and almost festive. It cost a nickel. You have the nickel. The nickel represents the specific discretionary money of a man who has paid rent and put something aside and eaten adequately and still has 5 cents left, which is more than some men on your floor have on a Saturday afternoon. You ride north. The city changes beneath you as you go. The yards fall away. The crowded streets of back of the yards, the low buildings, they fall away over 15 blocks, replaced by streets that look like a different Chicago. Streets with trees, buildings with actual ornamentation, decorative stonework, awnings, window boxes, streets where people walking are not specifically going to or coming from work. You ride through Bridgeport, Douglas, past the edge of the Black Belt on the south side, where you can see the geography of racial division written in the very density of blocks. Then the Loop appears. You've seen the Loop from a distance, from the L platform near the yards. The downtown skyline visible on clear days as a cluster of tall buildings against the sky. But distance compresses it into something abstract. Up close, the Loop is a different thing entirely. You get off at Madison State, and you stand on the sidewalk and look up. Chicago invented the skyscraper. Not the word came later, but the thing, the structural concept of a steel frame, allowing a building to rise to heights masonry couldn't reach. The idea was born here, after the Great Fire of 1871 destroyed so much that the city had to rebuild from nothing, and rebuilding from nothing gave engineers the chance to try ideas that would have been impossible to retrofit onto existing structures. The buildings above you are 18 stories, 20 stories, higher. They line both sides of State Street, creating a canyon effect that funnels the July wind down between them. The wind feels clean here, coming off the lake, and for a moment you close your eyes and breathe air that is not air from the yards. The sound is different here too. Not quieter, louder, actually, with more traffic, more voices, the ring of streetcar bells and percussion of automobile horns. But a different quality of noise. Commerce noise. Not industrial, not rhythmic. The chaotic music of a place where thousands of individual transactions are happening simultaneously, where desire and money are meeting each other on sidewalks. Department stores. Marshall Field and Company occupies an entire city block on State Street. 13 stories, its facade dressed in stone the colour of clean cream, mosaic tiles in the entry vestibule, brass fixtures on the revolving doors, a doorman in a uniform that probably cost more than your monthly wage. You go in, not to buy anything. You have nothing to buy with. What's inside cost the wages of a week for a single item, a pair of gloves, a hat, a length of ribbon, and you know this before you cross the threshold. You go in because Cheswaff said to see the rest of the city. The interior is cool, actually cool, an actual temperature difference from outside maintained through some system of electric fans and what you've heard called air conditioning, a technology new and expensive and apparently available in department stores for the benefit of people with money to spend on things they don't need. You stand in the cool air of Marshall Field's ground floor and look around. The glass cases, the merchandise arranged with the specific artistry of people whose job is to make objects look like they contain inside them a promise about who you'll be if you acquire them. Silk scarves in colours you don't have names for. Perfume bottles shaped like things that have no relation to perfume. Hats. Dozens of hats under glass waiting. Women in summer dresses moving through the aisles with the unhurried confidence of women who belong somewhere. A floor supervisor, young man, about your age in a suit, approaches. He looks at your boots. He looks at your hands. He looks at your face. Can I help you find something, sir? The sir is technically correct, but it contains a question that is not technically a question. The question is, what are you doing here? Just looking, you say. He steps back, but doesn't go away. You look at a case of men's wristwatches for approximately 3 minutes. Then you leave. The lake is 6 blocks east. You walk east. And then Michigan Avenue opens in front of you, and past it, Grant Park, and past the park, Lake Michigan. Grant Park in late July is green in the way parks with money and maintenance are green. Managed green, clipped and watered. People on benches, people walking dogs. A man selling roasted nuts from a cart. You buy a small bag. A nickel. You've spent a nickel on the train already, which is 2.5% of your daily wage. The nuts take it to 5%. You walk to the edge of the lake. The scale of it hits you. There is no other shore visible. You know technically that there's Michigan on the other side. You've seen maps. But the other shore is beyond the horizon, which means standing here you're looking at something that presents itself as ocean, as the edge of the world. The water is blue-green and moving. Waves coming in and touching the stone edge of the breakwater with a sound that is the most purely natural sound you've heard since you left Poland. Not industrial, not domestic, just water on stone. The oldest sound there is. You stand there for a long time. Behind you to the west, the skyline of the city rises in the hazy July air. In front of you, the lake stretches to nothing. Between the skyline and the lake, you, a 21-year-old man from a village outside Krakow, standing in a July park in Chicago, eating roasted nuts, trying to figure out the shape of his own life. You think about what Czesław said, about what it means to be here, about the cost, the wages, the heat, the floor, the smell you carry home no matter how carefully you scrub. About what's being built, slowly, in exchange for all of it. A boy back home would know how this story ended. The village had its shape, and your shape in the village was determined by the village's shape, and the ending was visible from the beginning. A farmer's son becomes a farmer, or leaves, and becomes something unknown to the village. You left. What you become now is not determined in advance. That's terrifying. It's also the thing, standing at the edge of an inland sea in the hazy afternoon heat, that feels most like the thing you came for. You don't have a word for it in Polish. You're not sure you have it in English yet either. You finish the nuts, fold the paper bag, put it in your pocket because there's a bin 100 yards back, and you'll put it there on the way out. There's a building 2 blocks south of your tenement that you try not to think about too directly. The rendering plant. If the slaughterhouse is the beginning of the industrial process, the conversion of animal into usable product, the rendering plant is the end, or rather, the end of what was left over after the beginning. The parts the main processing couldn't use. The bones and fat and blood and miscellaneous biological material that accumulates in vast quantities when you process 40,000 animals a day. The rendering plant converts this material into lard, tallow, bone meal, blood meal, glue, glycerin, various other products that go into American kitchens and factories and don't, on the label, announce where they came from. It runs 24 hours. In winter, you barely notice it. The cold keeps the smell contained. In July, the rendering plant is a fact of life in the way gravity is a fact of life. Always present, always operating, always shaping what everything else is like. The smell from the rendering plant is different from the slaughterhouse smell. The slaughterhouse smell is iron and animal. The rendering plant smell is something hotter, more processed. The smell of fat at high temperature, of things being broken down past their first nature into something that was never alive. It's a cooking smell the way burning wood is a cooking smell. Technically accurate, but wrong in some way you feel more than analyse. On the worst July days, high temperature, no wind, high humidity, the smell from the rendering plant settles over the neighbourhood like a layer of atmosphere. It goes into food you cook on your hot plate, into the sheets you sleep on, into the pages of the Polish language newspaper Józef brings home on Sundays. You've had this conversation with yourself, the one about how people live like this, how human beings find the capacity to not just endure but to build. Church, community hall, pierogi sold from windows, children running in the street. In a place that smells like this. The answer you've come to over 8 months is not philosophical. It's practical. You stop noticing the smell. Not fully, not ever fully. But the human brain is exceptional at downregulating constant stimuli, at reassigning things from the category of signal, requiring attention to the category of background. The brain is doing this all the time, filtering, adjusting, maintaining functionality in the face of overwhelming input. The smell becomes background. The same way the sounds of the line become background. The same way the heat becomes background. The same way everything that would be unbearable at initial exposure becomes, through exposure, the conditions under which life is lived. You wonder sometimes if this is resilience. You wonder sometimes if it's something else. The worst thing that happens to you in July doesn't involve you directly. This is important. The worst thing happens to a man named Piotr Wachowski on the chain line. Piotr Wachowski, not your roommate Piotr, another Piotr. There are a lot of Piotrs in back of the yards. Works the overhead chain maintenance. The overhead chain is the mechanical heart of the disassembly line, a continuous loop of chain driven by motors running on a track at ceiling height, carrying the weight of several hundred animals at various stages of processing at any given moment. Without the chain, the line stops. When the chain stops, everything stops. The foremen have a horror of the chain stopping. This means the maintenance men work on the chain while it's running. Take a moment to let that land. The chain is moving. It's carrying weight. It's been running for hours and the metal is warm to the touch. And the men who fix problems with it are doing so while it's in motion, because the cost of stopping it outweighs, in the company's calculus, the risk to the men who work on it. Wachowski was working on a sticking trolley, a wheel not moving freely through the track, when the chain jumped. You don't see it happen. You hear it. A sound distinct from every other sound on the kill floor, cutting through the ambient roar in a way that makes every person in the building stop for a fraction of a second before their brains have processed what happened. A shout, then a different kind of sound, then shouting, multiple voices. The line stops, the mechanical hum gone. In the silence, Wachowski's voice, cutting through everything. Everybody back, step back. You're back by 2 stations, far enough that you don't see the full extent of it, but close enough that you see them carry Wachowski out. He's conscious. You can see him moving, but his right hand is wrapped in someone's apron, and the apron is already dark. Miss Holmberg is not going to be enough for this. They take him in a company wagon to Cook County Hospital, a 20-minute drive, and on the way, whatever is going to happen to Piotr Wachowski's right hand either happens or it doesn't. Walkowski stands at the front of the line, 200 men looking at him. He looks back at them with his red face and his clipboard and his specific expression, the expression of a man who contains a number of things he cannot say in this context to these people. 10-minute break, he says, then we restart. No acknowledgement of what just happened, no announcement, a 10-minute break, and then the line restarts. Thud, slide, loop, click, step. The rhythm reclaims you. You go to the river in your head, but today the river doesn't work. Today the river is just a memory of a place, and your hands are moving, and somewhere across the city in a hospital, a man named Piotr Wachowski is finding out what he lost. In the break alcove at lunch, nobody talks about it directly. You talk around it. Someone says the chain system is old, that the maintenance budget has been cut, that they keep repairing what should be replaced. Someone else says that complaint has been made before the 1919 strike, and nothing was done. A third man says something about the union, and the man next to him puts a hand on his arm, gently, and he stops. Not because the union is a bad idea, but because they are inside the gates. And inside the gates there are men who report to Walkowski, who reports to Dantkowski, who reports to the superintendent, whose job includes monitoring for exactly this kind of conversation. This is what takes time to fully understand about Back of the Yards. It's not just a neighbourhood, it's a company town. Not officially. The company doesn't own the houses, doesn't technically control who lives there. But the company employs most of the men in most of the buildings on most of the streets in a radius of a mile, and this creates a specific gravity. The company is always present, not as a person or a face. The men who run Swift and Company don't come to Back of the Yards. They live in different neighbourhoods, further north near the lake, in places where the air is clean, but as a fact, a force. The way weather is a force, not malicious, not benevolent, just operating according to its own logic. You think about this while eating your bread. You think about Wachowski's hand. You think about what Czesław said. The American people were very concerned about the sausage. You think about the view from Grant Park, the lake spreading east, infinite and clean, the city at your back. You eat. You drink your water. The whistle blows. You go back. On Friday evening, in the last week of July, it finally rains. Not a polite rain. A Chicago summer thunderstorm. The kind that has been building for days in atmospheric pressure. Everyone on your street has been feeling in their joints and temples without naming it. The kind that, when it comes all at once. You're on the street when it starts, on your way home, taking the slow route because it's Friday and you can, because the week has been the kind that requires a longer walk home. The sky goes green for a moment, just a moment, that specific quality of light that exists only immediately before a serious storm, a greenish grey that changes the colour of everything. Then the thunder. Close, genuine, the kind that doesn't sound like distant percussion but like something structural, like the air itself cracking. Then the rain. You're soaked in approximately 15 seconds. The street erupts into the specific chaos of people and weather colliding unexpectedly. Vendors pulling covers over their carts, women grabbing children, men running for doorways, a horse on the corner startling against the thunder, straining at its hitch, while the delivery driver holds the reins and says something firm. You don't run. You've been hot for 11 days. You've been carrying the heat of the building and the yards and the smell and the weight of the week. The rain is cold, not cool, cold. The temperature drops 15 degrees in 30 seconds. and the rain coming off Lake Michigan has the specific freshness of water that was lake water this morning and is falling on you now. You stand in it like an idiot, just standing there while people stream past seeking shelter, and you let it fall on your face and your neck and soak through your shirt. The cold water running through your hair, down your back, the smell washing off the street in the runoff, the gutter running grey-brown with a week's worth of accumulated back of the yards. You stand there until you're completely soaked, and then you walk the rest of the way home in the rain, and by the time you get to your building you're cold and wet and lighter than you've felt in 11 days. Wadek is home when you get in. Slightly unusual. Wadek works the afternoon shift at the rendering plant 4 to midnight. He's sitting on the bed with his coat on, even though the rain has cooled things down, holding a letter. He looks up when you come in. Good news or bad news, you ask in Polish. He holds out the letter. You take it, read it. It's from his wife, written by his wife's sister on her behalf, because Wadek's wife doesn't write well. It says their youngest daughter has been sick. The kind of sick where the doctor comes. The kind that costs money they don't have. And they've borrowed from the wife's sister. And could Wadek please send what he can? You look at him. He's 31 years old. He has a cough that hasn't stopped since March. He's been in Chicago for 8 months, same as you. And every cent he makes beyond his share of the rent goes into an envelope to Krakow every 2 weeks. Regular as a tide. She'll be fine, you say, 'cause you don't know what else to say. He nods. He probably knows this too. Children get sick. Children recover. But the specific helplessness has been 7,000 miles away when the doctor comes, that's something else. Go to work, he says. I'll be all right. You're not at work. He looks at his hands. I called in. I'll make it up Saturday. He won't lose the job. Wadek is reliable, and reliable men on the afternoon shift are hard to keep. But he'll lose Saturday's regular rate and get the off-peak rate instead. You sit on the end of the bed and don't say anything, because nothing you say will fix the distance or the money or the cough that sounds slightly wrong when he breathes. Outside, the rain is still coming down, hitting the window glass in a way that's almost musical. The city sounds different in the rain. Josef knows a place, stated as fact without elaboration, on a Saturday night in the 3rd week of July, when the heat has broken and there is the particular post-rain quality of air in the city. Clean and cool and almost forgiving. There's a place, Josef says, on 35th Street. Music. 35th Street is north and east, toward Bronzeville, the neighborhood the Great Migration built, where the black community of Chicago has organized since the wave of arrivals from the south that started around 1910 and hasn't really stopped. You've heard about the music there. Everyone has. Chicago in 1924 is in the middle of something. The jazz clubs, the ballrooms, the corner bars where musicians who came up from New Orleans and Memphis are playing something that didn't exist 10 years ago and is now becoming what it will be. We go there, you ask, meaning men from back of the yards, Polish men with stockyard smell on their boots. It's a bar, Josef says. Money is the same colour. This is truer than it is complete, but Josef is not wrong that the bar on 35th Street on a Saturday night has a mixture of people that wouldn't assemble anywhere else in the city. The music does something to those distinctions, loosens them, at least temporarily, in the specific way that the right kind of music has always done to the specific distinctions that humans build between each other. You go. The bar is a narrow room, a stage that's really just a platform at one end, 3 feet of raised floor, and tables and chairs mostly full by the time you arrive. Smoke in the air. dense and blue. The band, a trumpet, a piano, a bass player standing with his instrument like he's in conversation with it. A drummer behind a setup he's playing with the specific controlled violence of a man who has found the exact right home for his particular energies. The trumpet player there isn't really a word that works. He's playing something that should be too fast to follow, and you follow it. The note's doing something that isn't melody exactly, isn't simple melody, but is a conversation with melody, going past it, behind it, through it, coming out the other side somewhere you didn't expect. You don't know this music. You know church music. You know the folk songs from back home. You've heard American popular music from the piano at the community hall. Competent piano, nice songs, structured. This is different. This is the music being made in this city, right now, in this particular place, in this year. It won't sound like this later. It'll change. It'll get recorded. It'll travel. It'll influence everything that comes after in directions nobody in this bar can predict. But right now, it just sounds like what it is. Something being invented in front of you. You drink 2 beers, you sit and listen. There's something the music does to the weak, not erases it. The weak is still there. Rudzik on the floor, Wachowski's hand, Wadek with the letter, the heat, the smell, the chain. These things don't go away. The music doesn't make them go away, but it reframes them, puts them inside something larger. You're in a bar in Chicago in 1924, and the music being played in front of you is something that didn't exist a generation ago. That is being invented by people who also had reasons to feel that the conditions of their lives were designed to grind them down, who had reasons far more historically intentional and systematically brutal than yours. And they made something that has no ground in grinding down, something that insists on complexity, on intelligence, on the refusal of simple answers. The trumpet player lands on a note that seems impossible, and then rests there for a moment before the next phrase. Something like that, you think. Yes. August comes, the heat returns, as you knew it would. Different from July, drier somehow, the humidity dropping slightly. You learn the difference. The hogline runs, the chain runs, thud, slide, loop, click, step. You get slightly faster. Not a lot. You were already fast enough that Wachowski stopped watching you. But a small, marginal improvement that exists as a feeling in your hands more than a measurable change. Your body adapting to the work in specific ways, building the muscle memory that converts effortful action into automatic action. Your Polish gets mixed with English, not because you're trying. You speak Polish at home at the community hall with Józef and Andrzej and Mrs. Szymanska, but because English is the language of the yards, and the yards take up 10 hours of your day, and language is not something you can keep entirely separate from the rest of you. Wachowski starts calling you by your first name sometimes. Not always, just occasionally. Thomas, check the hook before you clip. Different from Kowalski, step up. A small thing, not nothing. Rudzik comes back in September, on the afternoon shift in the casing room. You see him sometimes in the yard at lunch. He nods, you nod back. His colour is better. He's thin. He lost weight in the weeks after the heat collapse, but he's moving well. Wachowski doesn't come back. You hear, through the network of information that runs through back of the yards the way the blood drains run under the streets, that he lost 2 fingers, not the whole hand. He's working at a hardware store on Archer Avenue. Lower pay. He moved his family to a different neighbourhood. These things happen. They are filed in the category of things that happen. You try to keep them from becoming things you don't think about. You try to hold them in some part of your attention that isn't so routine they disappear. You're not always successful. Pyotr, your roommate Pyotr, reveals in September why he's been saving. He's going to night school. This comes out at dinner at Mrs. Szymanska's, where he says it quietly, without fanfare, as if he's been practicing saying it out loud and has decided tonight is the time. The night school at the community centre on 47th Street offers English classes, basic accounting, American history. It costs $4 a semester, which is why he's been saving since he arrived. Josef looks at him. Smart, Josef says. Coming from Josef, this is the equivalent of a standing ovation. Pyotr starts going on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. He comes back with his workbook and sits at the table in the room and goes over his exercises before sleeping, using the lamp that the four of you negotiate, which has to be out by 10 because Wadek needs to sleep before his 4 a.m. shift. You watch him work sometimes before you fall asleep, the careful letters, his tongue slightly out when he concentrates, the way people do who learn to write later than some. Something shifts in you, watching this. You don't know yet what it is. It's not a decision, not yet, but it's a thing that wasn't there before. Something taking shape in the way decisions take shape before you know you've made them. In October, Chisław stops coming to work. After 3 days, Andrei mentions it in the morning walk, and you both understand from his face that it's more than a missed day. You go to see him Wednesday evening. Chisław lives in a building on 46th Street. 2 rooms, one more than you have. Because after 12 years at the Yards, he can afford a whole extra room. His wife lets you in. A woman his age with a face full of competent worry. The kind that has been there long enough to become structural. Czesław is in the back room, sitting in a chair near the window, not in bed. He's the kind of man who refuses to be in bed when he can be in a chair. He's reading a Polish newspaper. He looks not good. The thinness the cough has been building in him is more visible now. The gauntness, the specific quality of a person whose body is spending its resources on something other than maintaining itself. Sit, he says. You sit. They're calling it miner's lung, he says, without preamble. But it's not just miners, it's any man who breathes dust for long enough. Stone dust, coal dust. He pauses. Bone dust. The bone processing operation. The part of the disassembly line where bones are crushed for meal. The dust from it, visible in the air some days, a fine white-grey particulate that catches the light and looks almost decorative, has been accumulating in Czesław's lungs for 12 years. Can they do anything, you ask? He makes a sound, not quite a laugh and not quite a dismissal. They can tell me to rest. I rest a week. I go back, the bone dust is still there. He puts down his newspaper. I'm going to tell you something, not as advice, as information. You wait. I knew about this, not the medical name, but I knew the cough was wrong 5 years ago. I knew men who had the same cough and what happened to them. I knew. He looks at his hands. I stayed because my son needed 2 more years of school and my wife needed the rent and the company insurance only applies if you're active. So I stayed, a pause, and I'd probably stay again in the same situation because the math worked out for my particular situation. My son is in school, my daughter is married, the math worked. He looks at you. The math isn't the same for everyone. You're 21. Your math is different. He picks up the newspaper again. Know your numbers, he says. That's all. Know what you're trading and what you're getting for it and make sure the trade is worth it. You sit with him for another hour. When you leave, his wife sees you to the door. He'll be all right, she says. He's stubborn enough to be all right for a long time. You believe her. But walking home through the October dark, past the smell and the pens and the rendering plant running its overnight cycle, you think about math. Your math. You write a letter home in November. This takes 3 attempts. The first attempt is too positive. An edited version of your life. The kind of letter that makes your mother feel you're doing fine in a way that won't prevent her from sleeping. You throw it away because it's mostly not true. The second attempt is too honest. A catalogue of the smell, the wages, the heat, Wachowski's hand, Czesław's lungs, Rudzik on the floor. You throw that away too because it's true, but not the whole truth, and sending your mother only the hard parts is its own kind of lying. The third attempt. Dear Mama, I am well. I am working at the stockyards on the hog line. The work is hard and the pay is not what I thought, but it is money, and I am saving what I can. I have a room with my cousin Josef and 2 others. Chicago is large. I've seen the lake, which is like an ocean. I've heard music that I cannot describe, except to say that it is the music of this city and this time, and I'm glad I heard it. I am learning to be here. It takes longer than I thought it would, but I am learning. A man I work with named Czesław has been here 12 years. He has a house, and his children are in school. He has lungs that are not good from the work, but he says his math worked out. He is teaching me to know my numbers. I don't know yet what I'm going to be. I'm 21. I have time. I miss you and Tata and Marizia. I miss the river. Sometimes in the worst hours at work, I think about the river and it helps. You're Thomas. You fold it. Write the address you've had memorized since the day you left and mail it on the way to work. The 2nd July comes. The smell comes back. You've spent a winter without it, which you would never tell anyone and barely admit to yourself. But the smell comes back and some part of your brain recognizes it as home. Not the smell specifically, the return of it. The seasonal cycle that has now, for the 2nd time, brought you to this point. You're 22 now. The line has changed slightly. A new mechanical system for the overhead chain. The safety upgrade that Mrozek mentioned in the November meeting, and that apparently enough of the right people asked for in enough of the right ways that it happened, though nobody says it was because of any meeting. It just happened. The company made a safety improvement. These things occur. Wachowski, as far as you know, is still at the hardware store. Rudzik is back on the main floor. Different station. Ham processing section. Lighter work. Slightly lower pace. Wadek went home to Poland in March. Not because he chose to. The lungs made the decision. He left on a Tuesday, his cough no better than in January, with a handshake for each of you in the room and a specific look on his face that you haven't found the right word for in Polish or English. Some combination of relief and defeat that has the structure of both and the taste of neither. New person in the room, a boy named Bartosz from a village in the mountains of southern Poland, barely 19, who is doing exactly what you did in your first weeks. Wide eyes, slow at the line, watching everything with the attention of someone cataloguing the machine he's become part of. You show him the water basin tap, the trick with the window in summer, how to tie the apron so the back doesn't gap. Wachowski, watching from across the room, says nothing. But you see it, that same nod. The small one, with no ceremony. The one that says, "Good, you've earned a Wachowski nod." In this specific economy, in this specific context, that is a kind of wealth. In August, you take the L North again, same route, same nickel, same city changing under the tracks. You sit on the grass at the edge of Grant Park, the skyline to the west, the lake to the east, same as before. But you see different things in it. The scale doesn't stun you the way it did a year ago. It's yours now, not in the sense of possession, but of familiarity. You know pieces of it. You know back of the yards and the community hall, and Mrs. Szymanska's dinner table and the bar on 35th Street. You know the L and the lakefront and the department stores on State Street where a supervisor looks at your boots and calculates who you are. You know the hog house. You know the loop of the chain. You know 11,000 repetitions of a single motion, the way your hands have encoded it in muscle and tendon. This city is not home yet, but it is a place you know. A place where you know things. There's a difference. The old-timers, Czesław before he stopped working, the veterans at Mrs. Szymanska's table, they knew this difference from the beginning and couldn't articulate it and didn't try to. You understand it now. The first year you survive. The second year you start to understand what you're surviving in. The third year, you won't have it for a few months yet, is when you start to become someone who belongs somewhere. You look at the lake, the same infinite blue-green water, the same absence of opposite shore, the same young man standing at the edge of it, a little less young, same, different, both. The most complicated idea you know in any language. On a quiet Thursday evening in August, when the shift is over and the line has run its last run, and you've cleaned your chain and hung it on the hook and clocked out and walked home, you sit by the window in the room. The window faces east. The evening light comes through it in the specific quality of late summer light, golden and slightly thick, the kind painters have always chased. The street below, a woman carrying something from the market. Two men arguing in Polish with the specific rhythm of an argument that is really a conversation. A boy of about 10 chasing a smaller boy about 8, probably his brother, about something that happened hours ago. The ordinary grammar of the neighbourhood. You think about Czesław's lungs. You think about your own lungs. You think about Piotr learning English in the evenings, about what he's building, slowly, carefully, with the specific patience of a young man who has decided something and is executing it. You think about the music on 35th Street, the trumpet player hitting the impossible note. You think about your mother's letter, arrived in February, read enough times you could recite it from memory. She said she was proud. She said your father was proud. She said your sister Marija was engaged to a boy from a neighbouring village, wedding in the spring. You weren't there for the wedding. That's the cost of this particular trade. You weren't there. You won't be there for a lot of things, for a time, maybe for a long time. The distance costs something, and knowing what things cost is, as Czesław taught you, important. You know what you're getting, you know what you're paying. Is the trade worth it? You look out the window. The light is going amber now, the late evening gold settling towards something softer. Back of the yard smells, in August evenings, different from the morning. The heat of the day has done something to the air, combined and alchemized and produced something that is not the raw smell of the morning, but something more layered, more settled, something that has been here for 60 years and will be here, probably for 60 more. Your neighbourhood. You hold that sentence in your head for a moment. Your neighbourhood. There you go. The room is warm. Bartosz is asleep. He sleeps like someone who's been working 14-hour days, which he has, the deep unself-conscious sleep of genuine exhaustion. He barely moves. Piotr is doing his English homework at the table. The lamp is on. You can see the careful movement of his pencil from where you're lying on the mattress. Outside, Chicago at night. Not quiet. Chicago is never quiet. The stockyards run overnight, reduced capacity but running. The rendering plant runs. The L train runs on reduced schedule but runs. The city breathes in its night mode, which is lower and slower than day but not absent. You close your eyes. The hoghouse comes to you in the twilight between waking and sleep. Not as a nightmare. You expected nightmares in the early months and had them occasionally. Mostly what comes now is just the rhythm. Thud, slide, loop, click, step. Your hands know this motion. Your hands will know this motion for the rest of your life, you suspect. That particular neural pathway, worn smooth by 11,000 repetitions, accessible without thought, stored somewhere below conscious recall. It'll be there when you're 40, when you're 60. You went into the hoghouse and the hoghouse went into you. That's not a bad thing necessarily. Every work you do changes you. Every repetition teaches your body something. The question is whether what's being taught is something you want to know. And the answer, you've been arriving at this answer for a year, is yes. What you learned is how to do hard things without complaining about them. How to be present in a place that rewards presence and punishes absence. How to read the mood of a line, a room, a supervisor, a neighborhood. How to eat what you have and sleep when you can and show up on time. These are not glamorous skills. They're not the skills you came to America for. Not explicitly. You came for something larger, vaguer, for possibility, for space, for the American thing everyone in Poland talked about as if it were a substance you could acquire by proximity. What you got instead was specific, concrete, the chain in your hands, the clock on the wall, the particular weight of Rudzik when he couldn't stand. More real than the vague thing you came for. Maybe that's what America is, not the abstract possibility. The specific possible thing you can actually reach, if you reach far enough and correctly enough. Piotr's pencil scratches across the paper. Outside, a dog somewhere starts barking and then stops. The rendering plant hums 2 blocks south, processing the residue of today's 40,000 animals into tomorrow's lard and bone meal, and the 100 things that people use without thinking about where they came from. Your lungs breathe Chicago air, the same air Czesław breathed for 12 years, the same air Mrs. Szymanska has been breathing since 1913, the same air the Lithuanian men breathe, and the men at the far end of the lunch yard, and the women selling pierogi from apartment windows. Your air. You breathe it. Somewhere, in a century that hasn't happened yet, someone will stand in this neighborhood and find it changed beyond recognition. The slaughterhouse will close. It does. In 1971, the last animal processed, and the yards that employed 40,000 people at their peak will slowly be reclaimed, developed into parks and community gardens and housing and a school. The smell will go, not right away. It'll linger for years, in the soil, in the brick, in the institutional memory of the neighborhood, but eventually it'll go. The people will stay longer than the smell. A church on 46th Street, or one that replaces it, will still be standing. The community will still be there, changed in its demographics, changed in its language and culture, but there, still organized around the human need to be somewhere with other people, to build something, to eat at each other's tables. The city will keep growing. The lake will stay. The L train will still run. Newer cars on the same elevated steel, the same fare. More now, taking the same route north, the same buildings changing under the tracks. People will come from far away and find a city so large and loud and complicated that it takes a year just to understand what they've stepped into. They'll learn the rhythms, they'll find the repetition that teaches their hands something, they'll eat at each other's tables and listen to each other's music and figure out slowly what the trade is worth. Some things don't change. The need to belong somewhere, the cost of getting there, the particular exhaustion of a day that asked everything from you and got it, and the specific mercy of a warm room at the end of such a day. There's a trial happening in the city. You learn about it the way you learn most things that happen outside the yards, through fragments. Through the Polish language newspaper Józef brings home on Sunday, through snatches of conversation in the lunchyard, through the English words that float through the morning streets from newsboys shouting the day's headline, Leopold, Loeb, Darrow. The names stick even before you understand why. Piotr explains it to you on a Tuesday evening, using his improving English to describe what he's read in the Tribune, which he started borrowing from the library reading room on 47th Street as a way of practicing. Two young men from wealthy families on the South Shore, University of Chicago students, one 19, one 18. In May, they kidnapped and murdered a 14-year-old boy named Bobby Franks, a child from their own neighborhood. They killed him in a rented car and tried to dissolve the body in a drainage culvert. They did this, according to the newspaper, according to what they apparently told police without much resistance, as an intellectual exercise, to prove they were superior enough minds to commit a perfect crime. The crime was not perfect. There's a court within a week. Now Clarence Darrow, the most famous defense lawyer in America, a man whose name even you know from 8 months of learning the country's mythology, is defending them, not to prove their innocence, but to save them from the noose. The trial is the news. It has pushed everything else off the front pages. The newspapers print every detail. The lawyers' arguments, the expert witnesses, the statements from the families, the psychology, the theory that these young men are sick rather than simply evil, the question of whether wealth changes the equation of justice. You read what you can. Your English is improving. Not Piotr's level, but improving. You can read a newspaper headline and most of a short article. What you notice in the lunchyard is how men talk about it. The older Polish men, the ones who've been here long enough to have opinions about the American legal system, talk about it with a specific bitter amusement. Darrow, says Andrei. He says the name like a weather report. If you can afford Darrow, you're already in a different country. What do you mean? Bartosz asks. Bartosz is still in the stage of asking what things mean. Wachowski, Andrei says, lost 2 fingers on the chain. What happened? He got $30 from the company as settlement. $30 and a letter saying the accident was partly his own negligence. Silence. These boys killed a child. Killed him for fun, basically, deliberately. And they get Darrow to argue their brains aren't working right. He takes a bite of bread. Not bitter, he says, which is what he says when he is bitter. Information. You think about this for the rest of the afternoon. Not about the trial specifically. The trial is something happening in a courthouse you've never been inside, involving people who live in a world that intersects with yours about as much as the moon intersects with the floor of the hog house. But about the principle of it. The way the same city that contains Back of the Yards also contains the South Shore neighbourhood where Leopold and Loeb grew up manicured lawns, servants, Hyde Park intellectual culture, the university campus with its Gothic towers and its certainty of its own importance. The same July heat falls on both neighbourhoods. That's about where the similarity ends. You think about Bobby Franks, the 14-year-old, not the defendants, the boy who was walking home and encountered something terrible and didn't survive it. He's become a fact in a legal argument. His life is now evidence. Something about this won't leave you alone for several days. On a Saturday in late July, you take the L East and walk south to the Criminal Courts building. You have no plan. You're not going to see the trial. The courtroom is packed. Has been packed since the proceedings began, with journalists and society people and anyone with enough connections to get a seat. You have none of those things. You just want to see the building where it's happening. The Criminal Court building is on California Avenue, a massive structure, brick and stone, 5 stories, with a specific institutional weight of a building that was designed to communicate authority. It sits in a block with the county jail attached, the jail where Leopold and Loeb have been held since their arrest, reportedly in conditions that have been described in the newspapers as considerably more comfortable than the standard cell. You stand on the sidewalk outside. There are people standing here too. A small crowd shifting, watching the building with the idle curiosity of people who want to be near the thing everyone is talking about without being able to get inside. A few newspaper photographers, a vendor selling something from a cart. The building doesn't tell you anything. It's a building. But there's something clarifying about standing here, in the July heat, in your work clothes, outside the place where a question is being argued about whether 2 wealthy young men who committed deliberate murder should live or die. The question has been framed as a question about psychology, about the influence of Nietzsche's philosophy on impressionable minds, about what it means to be mentally abnormal versus morally culpable. Darrow is brilliant. Everyone says so. His summation, reported in detail across every newspaper, ran for 12 hours and is being called one of the great speeches in American legal history. 12 hours, arguing for their lives. Wachowski's fingers cost the company $30 and a form letter. You're aware that you're making an unfair comparison. The legal system and the labour compensation system are different systems operating under different rules, with different purposes. You know this. Josef has explained it to you. Czesław has explained it to you. But knowing it's an unfair comparison doesn't make the feeling of it any less accurate. You stand outside the building for 20 minutes. Then you walk back to the L stop. The verdict, when it comes in September, is life imprisonment rather than death. Darrow's argument worked. The judge sentenced them to life. In the lunch yard the day the news arrives, Andrei says nothing. He just nods once, slowly, with his specific expression. Then he eats his bread. Here's the other thing about 1924 in this city. The thing running underneath everything else. The way the blood drains run under the streets. Prohibition. The 18th Amendment was ratified in 1919. As of January 1920, the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages is illegal in the United States of America. In back of the yards, this is a legal technicality. Let me be more specific. In every building, on every street in the neighbourhood, someone knows where to get beer. Not the watered-down legal alternatives. Actual beer and wine and spirits. From the same places they've always come from. Made by the same people who've always made them. Move through the same informal networks that have always moved them. The Volstead Act is the law. Back of the Yards is a neighbourhood that has existed for 60 years on the premise that the people who live here work every day doing the work nobody else will do, for wages nobody else will accept, in conditions nobody else will tolerate, and in exchange for this, in exchange for all of this, they will be left the hell alone on Saturday nights. So there is beer. There is also something else. The thing about prohibition that you learn gradually in snatches is that it created a new kind of opportunity in this city, not just for the small-scale neighbourhood bootleggers who supply the buildings on 45th Street and beyond, for organised, scaled, business-like criminal enterprise. A man named Torrio built it first. A man named Capone, younger, from Brooklyn, his precise nationality the subject of some debate in the Italian community, is now the one everyone talks about. He operates mostly from a hotel in Cicero. He controls the supply chain for a significant portion of Chicago's illegal alcohol market. He has what could only be called a business organization. People who sell, people who enforce contracts, people who handle accounting. He also kills competitors, not personally, not usually. But the message that arrives when you try to operate in territory he considers his is clear, and tends to arrive at high velocity from a vehicle moving past at speed. In Back of the Yards, Capone is a distant fact, not present the way he's present in some neighbourhoods closer to his operations, but present as an atmosphere, present as the explanation for certain things that happen that are never explained officially. A bar on 47th Street closes 1 week in August and opens the following week, under different management with a somewhat different customer base and slightly different prices for the beer that is technically not being sold. You don't ask about this. Joseph specifically tells you not to ask about this. Information you don't need, Joseph says, is a weight you don't need to carry. Joseph's approach to Chicago's criminal infrastructure is the same as his approach to most things that cannot be fixed. Practical non-engagement combined with full situational awareness. He knows exactly where the boundaries are. He knows exactly which conversations not to have, and which rooms not to enter, and which men not to be seen talking to at certain times. There are 2 kinds of people who end up involved with those operations, he says. People who chose it, and people who are too slow to recognise the threshold. And you? I recognised the threshold in 1919. He looks at you. You should learn to recognise it too. It's not always obvious. It sometimes looks like a favour. This turns out to be useful information by November, when a man you've met at the community hall, cheerful, generous with rounds of drinks, always seems to have money, asks if you'd be interested in some side work, delivery, evening hours, good pay. You think about Joseph's word, threshold. No thank you, you say. The man shrugs, no hard feelings. He asks someone else. Later you find out what the delivery's involved. You do not regret the no. There's a fire in September, not in your building. 3 blocks south, in a tenement on 48th Street, a 6-story building, older than yours, wood framing inside the brick exterior. One of the buildings that went up fast in the 1890s when Back of the Yards was expanding, built by owners who were optimizing for units per dollar rather than fire safety. The fire starts on the 3rd floor on a Sunday evening. A cook stove, the pipe connection improperly maintained, or the pipe itself corroded, or someone moving it and not reseating it correctly. These are the explanations that circulate afterward. By the time the fire department arrives, the 3rd and 4th floors are involved. You can see it from your window, the glow of it, 3 blocks away, orange against the September sky. Not the flames directly, but their reflection in the clouds above, the way a fire has its own weather. You and Josef go toward it without discussing it. The way people move toward fires. Not foolishly, but the way you move towards something you might be able to help with. The street outside the building is chaos. People on the sidewalk looking up. People being helped down the fire escapes, which are working mostly the structure holding. Firefighters with hoses. The specific smell of this kind of fire, wood and plaster, and the accumulated contents of people's rooms, which is different from the yard smell and sits in a different place in your chest. A woman on the second floor throwing bundled clothes out the window to people below. Her whole apartment is landing in pieces on the cobblestones, prioritized somehow. Blankets first, then a coat, then something wrapped in a sheet. A man you don't know carrying a child down the fire escape. Not his child, as it becomes clear later. He was a neighbour who grabbed the child because the mother was panicked, and the man was simply closest to the stairs. By the time the fire is under control, 2 hours later, the 3rd and 4th floors are gone. The 2nd floor has water and smoke damage. The 5th and 6th floors survive structurally, but are uninhabitable until repairs are made. Nobody dies. This is considered fortunate. This is also considered a near thing. You help carry water for a while. You help move a piece of furniture someone has salvaged. You stand in the street and are present, which is all you can do. The families from the building are standing on the sidewalk, some in groups with neighbours who've taken them in, some alone with whatever they carried out. An old man sitting on a trunk with his hands on his knees, looking at the building with an expression you recognise, the expression of someone calculating what they've lost, and finding that the number is more than they can process right now. Mrs. Szymanska from your building takes in 3 women and a child for the night, without being asked, just appearing at the scene and organising it the way she organises everything, with the specific competent authority of someone who has dealt with emergencies before and knows that the moment after an emergency is when people need practical action rather than sympathy. You watch her do this. You think about what Czesław said, about knowing what you're trading, what you're getting, about the math. In the math of back of the yards, sometimes what you're trading is just having enough room to fit someone else's emergency without it destroying you. That's the surplus, not money, space, not physical space, emotional space. The space that comes from having built something stable enough that it can give a little. Mrs. Szymanska has that. She's been here since 1913. She has that surplus now. Someday, you think. Someday. In October, you start going to the reading room. The public library branch at 47th Street has a reading room. A long room with wooden tables, good electric light, newspapers in English and several other languages, books in both English and Polish. You go on Wednesday evenings. Piotr has already been going for months, using it for his English studies. He's the one who told you about it, in the way that people who found something useful tell other people almost against their own interests because the information is too good not to share. The first few Wednesday evenings, you just read the Polish newspaper, catch up on what's happening in Krakow, what's happening in the Polish state, the newly independent Poland, which is 8 years old now and still in the process of figuring out what it is. Then you start picking up English books, slowly, working your way through pages that you only half understand, using context to fill in the vocabulary you don't have yet, building the language in the specific way you build muscle. by using it against resistance. The librarian is a woman named Miss Donovan, perhaps 40, who works the Wednesday evening shift with the specific efficiency of someone who has made peace with a job that pays less than it should for skills that are more than anyone formally acknowledges. She notices you struggling with a particular book, a history of Chicago published 1920 that you've taken from the shelf, and comes to your table. "That's a difficult one," she says. "The sentences are long." "I like history," you say, in English. She looks at you with a reassessment, brief, almost invisible. "There's a Polish language history of Chicago in the reference section," she says. "Printed in 1915. Might be easier to start." You read both. The English version sentences are long, but you work through them. The history of Chicago, in either language, is a story about making things, about the prairie that existed here before any city, the Fort Dearborn at the edge of a lake in the 1800s, the town that grew, the fire that destroyed and cleared, the rebuilding that produced the city you live in. These stockyards as an economic engine, described in the book with an admiring tone that doesn't mention the workers except in passing, a note that they exist, a number attached to the word labour. The stockyards as history. The stockyards you work in every day, rendered in past tense and economic data. Strange to see the place you live in described from above. The same feeling as Kopacki's panoramic photograph in the bar. The same vertigo of altitude, but useful. Knowing that the place you're in has a history, that it existed before you, that it has a shape, is useful in the way a map is useful. You can't always follow the map exactly, but having it means you know something about the terrain. Miss Donovan, passing your table at 8:30 when the reading room's about to close, glances at what you're reading. "You work at the yards," she says, not a question. Your boots make it not a question. "Yes." "There's a book," she says, "if you're interested. The Jungle. We have it in Polish." "I know the book." She looks at you. "What do you think of it?" You consider. "He was right about the conditions," you say. "He wrote about men like me. He got it right." She waits, but the book became about the sausage. She looks at you for a moment that contains several things. "Yes," she says quietly, "that's exactly right." She moves away to begin closing up. Walking home, you think about the fact that a librarian in Chicago in 1924 just heard you make a point about a book and told you you were exactly right. This is not a thing that would have happened in your village. You file it. Small and real and yours. You go to church on Sunday mornings. You've been going since your second week here, when Joseph made clear that not going was an option, with social costs you probably didn't want to absorb. Not because God was watching particularly, but because the community that organised itself around St. Joseph's on Sundays was the same community that knew, who had a room to rent, who was hiring, who to call on when something went wrong. The network. Mass at St. Joseph's in back of the yards in 1924 is conducted in Polish. Father Malinowski has been the parish priest since 1910, which means he has 14 years of back of the yards in his bones. 14 years of confession from men who work the kill floor, funerals for people whose lungs gave out, baptisms for the children who'll grow up speaking English instead of Polish, first communions for children who know the prayers in a language their parents speak but they're already beginning to think indifferently. He's approximately 60 years old. He has the face of a man who has heard a great deal of the human condition in a small dark room and has not been destroyed by this, though he has been marked by it. He preaches without notes and at a length that suggests either that he has a lot to say or that he trusts his congregation to be patient, and he's right on both counts. You don't always listen to the sermon. Sometimes you just sit in the space. St. Joseph's is the largest building in this neighbourhood that isn't industrial. The ceiling vaults above you to a height that the tenements and the stockyards buildings never achieve. The light comes through stained glass in colours, blues and reds and the specific golden yellow that means either royalty or the sacred, depending on your frame of mind. You paid to build this, not you personally. You were in Poland when they built it, but people exactly like you, with wages exactly like yours, put money in the collection every Sunday for years to raise this ceiling and install this glass. There is something in sitting under a ceiling you paid to raise, something that is not quite pride and not quite peace, but contains parts of both. After Mass, the sidewalk outside St. Joseph's becomes the social centre of the week. Who has heard from whom back home? Whose daughter is getting married? Who has found work? Who is looking for a room? Who has a room to let? Who knows someone about the opening at Armour's in the casing department, which pays a half-cent more per hour than Swift, the information economy of the neighbourhood, running on Sunday mornings outside a Polish church in July heat. You stand with Józef and Andrzej and contribute your share. A man named Grabowski is looking for a fourth for his room. His cousin is going back to Poland. The building is on 46th. The rent is fair. You mention this to Bartosz, who's been sleeping in a room with 5 people and needs to find a better arrangement. A woman named Mrs. Kowalczyk, no relation, the name is common, mentions that her husband knows someone at the alderman's office who might be looking for an interpreter. Polish English, for the ward's immigrant services office. She looks at you when she says this. Not specifically, not with intention, but you catch it. Interpreter. Your English is not good enough. Not yet. But yet is doing a lot of work in that sentence. You note it. You file it in the category of things that might become possible. In November, there are meetings, not formal meetings, not the kind with notices posted on doors and chairs arranged in rows. Informal meetings, evenings at the community hall, men gathering in a way that looks casual and isn't. The word union is used carefully, like a sharp tool you handle with respect for what it can do to you if you grip it wrong. The 1919 strike is the reason for the caution. You've heard about it in pieces. Józef's version, which is spare and factual. Andrzej's version, which has more texture. Mrs. Szymanska's version, which is the most complete because she was running the community kitchen that fed men during the walkout, and she has a cataloguer's memory for detail. The strike of 1919. When the stockyard workers walked out for better wages and conditions. When the companies brought in black workers as strikebreakers, not because they wanted to, but because the companies offered them work when they'd been refused work, offered them entry when the unions had blocked their entry, and the men took it because men take work when it's offered in a city where they're trying to survive. And then the riot. 5 days, 38 people dead, 500 injured. You've seen the pens where those workers ate their lunch at the far end. You've never asked what any of them remember. The meetings in November are about whether now is different, whether enough time has passed, whether the labour movement has learned anything. You go to 2 meetings. You sit and listen. You don't speak. What you hear is the complicated arithmetic of collective action, the math of what a strike costs versus what it might gain. run through the specific variables of back of the yards in 1924, the unemployment rate, the company's current profit margins, the political climate under Coolidge, the relationship between the AFL and the newer industrial unions, whether Darrow might be available and what that would cost. These men know things, not just the general things, the arguments about labour and capital you can read about in any newspaper, the specific things, who on the floor can be trusted, who reports to management, which foremen are sympathetic, which company lawyers handled the last dispute and what their tactics were. Knowledge built over years, over the accretion of experience that turns a worker into someone who understands the machine he's part of. In the end, nothing happens. The meetings conclude without a decision to act. The moment isn't right. The moment isn't quite right. Josef, walking home from the last meeting, says something you remember. The moment being not quite right is always and forever the management's single greatest asset. You think about this for a long time. Winter in back of the yards is a different thing entirely from summer. The cold arrives in November like a creditor, persistent, impossible to ignore, something you have to accommodate whether you want to or not. The yards in winter. The cold does something to the smell, compresses it, contains it. The iron blood smell is still there, but muted, preserved rather than emanating. In November, for a week or two before the cold fully sets in, the smell is actually worse for a few days. The cold and the remaining warmth of fall doing something to the air chemistry. Then the temperature drops to something real, something genuine Chicago winter, and the smell settles into something manageable. The hog house floor in winter steams. In summer it was the hot air from outside meeting the interior. In winter it's the opposite. The animal heat of the processing inside meeting the cold air from the doors, and the floor exhaling something that looks, in the winter light, almost like breath. The whole building breathing. You work in your coat until 10 in the morning and without it after that, because by mid-morning the animal heat and the steam heat of the process have the interior at a temperature you'd call warm if you were setting your expectations based on December in Chicago. Your hands. This is the thing about winter work on the chain line. Your hands. You're working with metal. The chain is iron, cold-stored iron in December and January. The protective gloves the company provides are thin, and after 2 weeks develop specific holes in the places where friction is highest. You can request new ones. Walkowski has new ones. Getting him to issue them involves a conversation you've come to dread slightly, because Walkowski distributes new gloves with the expression of a man releasing something valuable from personal custody. Your hands crack, not metaphorically. The skin across the knuckles and at the base of each finger develops actual cracks, splits in the skin that bleed a little and sting sharply when you flex. Every morning, lacing your boots, the cracking is worse. Every evening, working the stiffness out of your fingers, the cracks remind you of themselves. Mrs. Szymanska gives you goose fat in a small jar and tells you to rub it in every night before you sleep. It helps. Your hands smell of goose fat and iron all winter. This is fine. Christmas in back of the yards is the centre of the year. Not commercially. Not the American commercial Christmas that the newspapers are beginning to describe. The department store, Christmas of Marshall Field's windows and gift-giving as performance. The Christmas here is the one from home, carried across the Atlantic in the way you carry things across the Atlantic, not in your luggage but in your bone marrow. Vigilia. Christmas Eve dinner, the 12 meatless dishes, hay under the tablecloth to remember the manger, an extra place set at the table for whoever might need a place. Josef arranges it. He arranges it with the specific logistics of a man who has been hosting this in America for 6 years and knows exactly where to get the herring and the beet soup and the pierogi and the carp being the logistical challenge since it must be live. And keeping a live carp in a bathtub for 3 days before Christmas is a thing that requires negotiation with everyone else who uses the bathroom on your floor. Mrs. Szymanska hosts the table this year. Her apartment is the largest, and she has the chairs and the space, and she wants to, which is the primary qualification. 12 people around the table. Josef, you, Piotr, Bartosz, Mrs. Szymanska herself, and her friend Mrs. Wierzbicka from the second floor. The Grabowski family. Husband, wife, their teenage son who is either interested in Bartosz's sister's photograph or just interested in something Bartosz keeps showing him on his phone. No, there is no phone. There is no sister's photograph. There is Grabowski's son looking at the ceiling and being 17. And Andrei, who came to Chicago alone in 1915 and has been in this neighbourhood ever since, who has family back in Poland he sends money to, but hasn't seen in 9 years. 9 years. You look at him across the table and understand something about the trade, something Czesław said and that you've been processing for months. The math is different for everyone. For Andrei, the math has cost 9 years of his family. What he got for it is, he's alive, he's housed, he's eating herring and beet soup at Christmas with 11 other people. Whether the math worked out will depend on what happens next. You can't know yet. The wafer, the opotek, brought from the church, is shared around the table. Each person breaks off a piece of everyone else's wafer and says the thing you say. Wishes for the coming year, health, prosperity, safe return, letters from home. All the things people who are far from home wish for at Christmas. When it comes to you, you hold the wafer and you look around the table. Josef, who's been your map in this city. Andrei, who gives you cigarettes in the morning. Piotr, bent over his English workbook in the evenings. Bartosz, who looked at the city with the same eyes you had a year ago. Mrs. Szymanska, who took in 3 strangers from a fire without being asked. You're not going to cry. You're 21, almost 22. You're Polish. You're male. You've been doing physical labour for 14 months and you're not going to cry at Christmas dinner. You don't cry. But something in your chest does something. You wish them health. You wish them prosperity. You wish them letters from home. You eat the 12 meatless dishes. Outside, Chicago has 2 inches of snow on the ground and more coming. The yards are running reduced hours for the holiday. The rendering plant, as far as you can tell, is running normal hours. Even Christmas cannot stop everything, but Christmas can stop this table for these hours, and this table stops it. That's enough. Years later, not many years, but enough, you'll find it difficult to explain back of the yards to people who didn't live it. Not the smell, oddly. The smell you can describe. You can say iron and fat and the particular biological chemistry of 40,000 animals a day, and people understand something of what you mean, even if they don't understand it the way you understand it. What's harder is the texture of it, the daily, the way the specific weight of a chain in your hands at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in February becomes something you carry permanently. Not as a burden, but as a fact about what your hands know. The way a neighbourhood builds itself around an industry that would, from the outside, seem to preclude anything like normal life, and builds it anyway. Church, school, table, music, reading room. The way Mrs. Simanska shows up for fires without being asked. The way Czesław tracked his daughter's wedding through 12 years of days that asked him to give something essential of himself. The way Andrei hands you a cigarette in the morning, every morning without ceremony. The way the whole neighbourhood smells on a winter morning when the cold has compacted everything, and the sky is grey and the men are walking toward the gates, and the church bells from St. Joseph's are marking the hour. You'll try to describe it sometimes. You'll say, it was hard. It was a specific kind of hard that teaches you things. You'll say, the people there knew something about survival that I haven't found in other places. You'll say, the smell was terrible, but I stopped noticing it. And I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing. And I've been thinking about that for years. What you won't say, because it doesn't translate, because the translation loses something essential, is this. I arrived with nothing, and the city was enormous, and the work was brutal, and the wages were not what they promised, and the heat was unreasonable, and the winter was punishing, and a man lost 2 fingers on a chain that should have been replaced. And we were not the concern of the legal system that occupied 17 columns of the Tribune, with a trial about 2 wealthy young men who murdered a child as an intellectual exercise. And I built something, not a big thing, not a monument, not a success story in the American mythological sense. The rags to riches, the immigrant made good, the promised land delivered on its promise. Something smaller, more real. I learned the streets, I learned the language, I learned the chain and the rhythm and the specific weight of what I was doing and what it cost and what it got me. I sat at a table at Christmas and wished people health. I stood at the edge of the lake and felt the wind. That's what I built. That's what I had to build first before anything else could be built on top of it. The room is warm. Your hands are resting. Outside the window, the city is doing what cities do when the people inside them are sleeping. It's running its late-night version, lighter and lower and darker, but running. The chain on the kill floor is still. In 8 hours it will move again. The lake is where it's always been, to the east, cold and enormous, its own geography entirely. St. Joseph's will ring in the morning, and somewhere between now and then, between the bells and the chain, and the ice on the water basin, and the morning street filling with men walking the same direction, somewhere in that span of hours is a thing that belongs entirely to you. Rest. Sleep as deep as a man earns after a day's real work. Sleep as dark and clean as lake water. Let your hands rest. Let the chain go slack. Let the river come back, the one from home, the cold one, the one your father's cousin fished on summer evenings when the light went long and golden and the water moved over the rocks in a sound that is the oldest sound there is. Let the smell fade. Let the heat lift. Let the enormous grinding fact of the city ease back to a hum, that constant background hum you've learned over 14 months to hear as something like a heartbeat. Not yours, the city's, running underneath everything, running while you sleep. You're warm enough. You're safe enough. You've earned enough. This night, this rest, this small quiet room, above a neighbourhood that smells of iron and fat and everyone's cooking and the cold clean edge of the lake reaching east into nothing. Let it carry you. Let tomorrow be tomorrow's business. Tonight, there's just this. Just the slow, dark descent into whatever dreams come to a 22-year-old man from Krakow who crossed 7,000 miles of ocean and winter and heat and noise and came out the other side of his first year knowing something real, the church bell somewhere, marking an hour, gone before you can count it. Gone. Good night.